Welcome to the Haven Collective. I'm J.R. Foresteros, and this is the Beacon Bit. Today we're reflecting on Revelation chapter 13 and the story of the two beasts, the beast from the land and the beast from the sea. In May 2017, in Portland, Oregon, at a Trump free speech rally, a man named Jeremy Joseph Christian stabbed three people who were attempting to protect these two young Muslim women from Christian as he was shouting anti-Islamic slurs at them. When he appeared in court, he said, "Free speech or die, Portland. You got no safe space. This is America. Get out if you don't like free speech. You call it terrorism. I call it freedom." It's this interesting idea, right? That what he was doing by hurling anti-Muslim slurs at these two young women was free speech. The idea that for speech to be free, a person should be allowed to say literally anything they want, that there's no restrictions on it. Most of us understand on some level that that can't be right, but it's hard to parse exactly what it looks like. And so today we're going to talk about another tool that fascist and authoritarian leaders and movements use to suppress and to get their agenda by, and that's propaganda. Again, a really popular and powerful one. Propaganda, Stanley defines as this: political propaganda uses the language of virtuous ideals to unite people behind otherwise objectionable ends. Okay, so it's doing two different things there, right? It's using virtuous ideals and using the language of virtuous ideals, like freedom of speech or freedom in general, to achieve undemocratic ends, things that do not liberate but instead bind. So creating terror, actually suppressing free speech by making other people afraid to speak up, right? Now, again, this is not something that is new. We do see it with the way Donald Trump has justified the oppression of trans people through an executive order that he claims is about defending women, right? Everyone thinks women should be defended. It does tie into some patriarchal values that a lot of us still have some echoes of, right? But again, everyone thinks women should be defended, but it's not actually about defending women. It's actually about persecuting trans people or militarizing our National Guard and sending it into American cities under the justification of keeping everyone safe. Again, everyone thinks we should be safe. Nobody thinks crime should be rampant, but using those as justifications to militarize the National Guard and expand his authoritarian power is a classic example of propaganda. Now, last week we talked about Rome's propaganda machine, particularly the Pax Romana, this insistence that if you are faithful to Rome, if you submit to them and follow their way, that will create more peace and flourishing because everywhere Rome goes, they bring peace. And there's a sense in which that's true because Rome brought peace or they would kill you, right? It was peace or die, Rome's way or die. The way Revelation imagines this particular moment is pretty fascinating, and frankly, it's one of my favorite parts of the book. It tells the story of these two beasts. One is coming up out of the sea, and it looks like the dragon, who we've already been told is Satan. So the dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns, and this beast that's coming up out of the sea also has 7 heads and 10 horns. So it very much looks exactly like the dragon, and otherwise, it's easy to identify as satanic. John helps us out later in the chapter and tells us that this beast it has 7 heads because those are the 7 hills on which the city rests, and that points us directly to Rome, which famously was founded on 7 hills. That's like saying the 13 original colonies, right? You immediately know that's America. So saying these 7 hills connects us to Rome, and we understand that this beast that's coming up out of the sea is Rome. It also makes sense because it's coming up out of the sea, and if you remember back when we talked about Revelation in the spring, the book of Revelation is addressed to churches that are in what today is modern-day Turkey, the Roman province of Asia, and to get to Rome from there, you had to cross the sea, right? So anything coming up out of the sea is coming up out of the Mediterranean Sea, out of the direction of Rome. So you have this beast, right? But then you have this other beast, and it comes up out of the land. So in other words, it is arising from among these churches, from among the province of Asia, in response to the land beast arriving. And this beast looks different. We're told that it has horns like a lamb, but that it speaks like the dragon. Okay, so again, it looks like whatever the lamb is in Revelation, but when it's speaking the words of the devil. And again, if you go back to our previous series in Revelation, or if you just go over and look at Revelation chapter 5, in Revelation, the Lamb is explicitly, clearly, and undeniably Jesus. So here we have some people who are they look like Jesus. They're cloaking themselves the same way propaganda does in virtuous ideals, but they're speaking the words of the devil. In other words, they're aligning themselves verbally with Rome. So they're cloaking themselves in these ideals to accomplish evil ends. That is exactly how Stanley describes propaganda. And it's, again, something we see all the time, that when an authoritarian demagogue arrives, there are always people who find it beneficial to partner with them, with their ideals, with their ends. And so they churn up the propaganda machine and get it going, and they convince us that it is okay to follow the demagogue, to give ourselves over to this authoritarian or this fascist way of seeing the world and this way of treating other people. I think the real challenge comes in for us then in discerning when is something propaganda and when is it genuine, right? Because not everything that looks like propaganda necessarily is, and a lot of things actually turn out to be propaganda that feel really authentic. Because again, that's the goal, is to make it feel as authentic and real as possible. The key difference is something that Stanley helps us understand. Do these things support the ends that they claim to, or do they actually undermine the things that they claim to support, right? This is the problem with propaganda. It's cloaked in virtuous ideals, but it's the things it's accomplishing are not actually virtuous. So you've maybe heard this before, right? When someone posits tolerance as a good goal for a society that has a bunch of differences in it, right? It's like, well, we should all be able, at a minimum, to tolerate each other's differences. And just because you don't agree with me, I shouldn't, immediately wage a war on you to convert you, right? I should be able to exist in tension with you and tolerate your differences. And then someone will come along and say, oh, so I guess the only thing that tolerant people won't tolerate is intolerance, and that's actually intolerant, so see, I win. And Stanley would say, no, that's the whole point, right? Is if you allow intolerance into the public square, it actually pushes out everyone that is supposed to be tolerated there. So as soon as you allow intolerance into the sphere, you've immediately defeated what you were claiming to support, which is a space where everyone is welcomed. Free speech works the same way. Free speech only works when everyone truly feels equally free to speak and to voice their opinions. When you have someone like Jeremy Joseph Christian, who uses his speech to create fear and terror in other people, it actually undermines the freedom of the space, because these other people who are marginal don't feel the same access anymore. They feel afraid, right? And so by allowing him to say literally whatever he wants, even if it's creating harm, you're actually defeating the purpose of free speech, which is to bring it to a place where everyone is allowed. And we actually even see this in the book of Revelation, all the way at the end of the book, when we see a vision of the heavenly city and everything is as it's supposed to be, and heaven and earth are one. We get this beautiful moment where we see the city and it says its gates are always open because it's never night, and people can come in and out all they want, and all the kings of the world are bringing their riches, and it's this amazing thing. And then it says, and no one who does anything evil is ever allowed inside. Wait a second. I thought everyone was allowed in, but now you're saying God is keeping some people out? Well, yeah. Because at the end of the day, God draws a line and says this will be a place of flourishing and justice and harmony. And anyone who's not willing to live in this space on those terms doesn't get to do that. The way C.S. Lewis said it in The Great Divorce is that at some point, evil must not be allowed to trump good, right? Evil must be put away. And that's what we see happening here. That's how you defeat propaganda. So the question that we have to ask when we face a piece of communication or an image or something that we heard from someone else and we're wondering whether or not it's propaganda, right, is, does this make us more free? Is this good news for everyone, or is it only good news for the select few that the particular movement prioritizes, right? If it's not good for us all, if it's not liberating for us all, then it's probably propaganda. This is an important skill for us to be able to develop as believers, because we see, going all the way back to the Roman Empire, these authoritarian powers are clever and they're careful, and they will happily wield our own language and rhetoric against us. So we have to be doubly clever. As Jesus said, wise as serpents and gentle as doves. So I look forward to diving into how we resist propaganda in our beacons this week. I think it's going to be a provocative and fruitful conversation for us. Until then, grace and peace be with you.